Hello and welcome to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrodin, historian and deputy director at the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum here at Camp Shelby. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, and the abbreviated resume that he so desires for me to speak from now on. How are you this morning, Bill?
Doing great, Seth. Excited to kind of diverge off into this special series that we're doing on a special topic that we've been waiting for a long time.
Indeed, indeed. And to clarify that, for the next several weeks, in line with our regular weekly release on the Pacific War, we will be doing an additional episode each week that covers our review of the Apple TV series Masters of the Air. We'll get into each episode and deliver the history around the missions and the people portrayed in the series in our normal yet abbreviated way. With us, as well as I'm sure you can see if you're watching, and if you're not, please do, is a new member of our crew for this limited run series. He is a longtime colleague of mine from our World War II days, and I do mean longtime colleague, one of the finest historians I've ever known, my best buddy, director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum, Tommy Lofton. Tommy, how are you this fine Monday morning?
Pretty good, guys. Glad to be here with you, and thanks for letting me be a part of this. And looking forward to all the conversations we'll be having over the next few weeks.
Of which we will have many, I am sure. I am sure.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. But Seth, does this make us the unauthorized history of the European theater now?
No. I know I see the comments that people are like, y'all guys need to do Europe. You need to get it in Europe. And that is a whole nother kettle of fish that is just
campaign.
Yeah, to say the least. It's not above our capability, it's above our current desire. Let's just leave it at that.
We'd be doing this until I was 80 years old if we go to the European theater, and we just don't.
We'll be doing this till I'm 80 years old if we go to the European theater.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm not saying we won't at one time, but it ain't happening anytime soon. That's for damn sure.
So this is a temporary respite into the European theater. Special project, yeah.
Special
really
project.
Important topic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as we always do, before we do get started, we want to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel as it helps people find our show. We want to get the history to the masses. And if you want to help us do that, please like and subscribe, blah, 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 on with the show. So we're going to cover episode 1 in here, and we're going to cover episode 2 in another episode, and episode 3, and so on and so on and so on. So, Bill, you said just before we started recording that you wanted to do some high-level setup for this. What are some of the things you wanted to talk about? Because the series, episode 1, just jumps right in. They just jump right into the air war. Yeah.
So of course, the series is based on a book that written by a guy that you two know pretty well, right? Don Miller, and a guy that I just met in December at the World War II Museum. But interestingly, Steven Spielberg wrote, who is a World War II buff, clearly, Band of Brothers, The Pacific, and a whole bunch of other things he's done, not to mention Saving Private Ryan. Steven Spielberg read Don Miller's book for entertainment, pleasure, I don't know, as a lark, and then referred Tom Hanks to it and said, specifically, I want you to look at these two characters in this book, because I think there's a story in there. And of course, those two characters are the ones we're going to talk a lot about these next several weeks. I'm going to refer to them shorthanded as Buck and Bucky. We'll get into more of that later. But so Tom Hanks gets the book, he reads the thing. And by the way, this is happening over 10 years ago. This is like, 11, 12 years ago, this is all going down. Tom Hanks says, yeah, but the two guys, I mean, less than 100 pages of this enormous volume, this book is devoted to these two guys. So there's not a story here. So they sicked their head writer from the days of Saving. Well, no, not so sure Saving Private Ryan, but from the days of
Band of Brothers,
the European, Band of Brothers, John Orloff on the project. So John Orloff started writing on this 10 years ago. 10 years ago. And he had to kind of pull the backstory of the two characters that are the main characters in, Masters of the Air, and craft it out of whole cloth, because neither of them had written books. he had to go to the families and then try to figure out which other characters we're going to be talking specifically about, mostly about the 100th Air Group today. Which of the other characters from the 100th Air Group, some of whom did write memoirs, diaries, books, how to weave all that together. And, they didn't write. Wing of the Prayer is a great example of it. So that took them 5 years to figure out what the bones of this miniseries would be. They call them limited series now, by the way. And then another year or so to kind of sell the people who would actually be paying for it. And then, it got to the point where Netflix, first of all, they went to HBO, it's now called Max, who did Band of Brothers in the Pacific, and they said, we're not doing that anymore. It's too expensive, right? And so they shopped it around. Netflix considered and abandoned it. Finally, as you said, Apple came to the rescue and agreed to fund it. So long story. And interestingly, there's a couple of little footnotes I want to put on this scene setting. First one is I read one review of the series, and the reviewer called the series unequivocally American, the whole series from beginning to end, which I found ironic since nearly all the actors are either Brits or Irish.
Yeah.
The only guy, only Doc is an American, or the main characters in the show. Now they filmed in England, I think, right?
They
And
did.
so maybe they did that as a cost-saving measure. Let's hire a bunch of local guys to save money. And so that was point number one. Footnote number one. Number two. My daughter, who's watching the series, says, "Dad, their accents are way over the top." And they're American accents, right? In New York and Boston and Maine, I detected one Maine accent, some Southern accents, and I had to tell her, so before TV homogenized American accents, that's the way they were. In fact, all three of us knew a bunch of World War II veterans who still talk like that with those heavy affected accents based on where they grew up till the day they died. So I had to tell her, no, that's not just a TV show affectation that's kind of over the top. They really did talk that way. And so if those of you young people who are watching this who think that these accents are over the top, they're not. I'll shut up, Seth.
No, they are not. And, and Tommy, jump in anytime. There's if you're gonna focus on one bomb group of the 8th Air Force, and this is not to say anything negative about any of the other ones, because I was, and I know, Tommy, you were too, when we were at World War II, we were in cahoots with quite a few of the bomb group associations, not the least of which is the 306th. If you're listening to this, hey, Sue, how are you? But the 100th is probably the most famous bomb group in the 8th Air Force. Even then, really, honestly, because they had some pretty bad runs of luck, and some of that wasn't luck. Some of that was some issues with the group, and we'll get to that as we get through the series. But if there was one group that had a cast of characters that literally could be used for a film, it would be the 100th Bomb Group, because a lot of the guys that you see that are portrayed or that will be portrayed in this series, you're gonna be like, oh God, these are caricatures of people. No, dude, they ain't. I mean, that's how these guys were. Right. They lived fast, and they were characters. I mean, and literally the definition of the term, they were a lot of them were very over the top, and that's just how these guys were. But the 100th probably is the best choice that you could have, used as a base for this story of the 8th Air Force bombing Europe in World War II. And that's something I think we need to kind of set up real quick, because we don't want to, make this a 2-hour long thing. But what I started to say is the series just bam, they just jump right in to the 100th, because that's the focus of the series. But what I don't think people understand is that, the 100th gets over there in 1943. They get over there in June, meaning, Europe, in late May, early June 1943. The bombing campaign in Europe had been going on for almost a year by the 8th Air Force. The first 8th Air Force mission over Europe was to Rouen, France on August 17th, 1942. So these guys had been bombing, the 8th had been bombing Europe for a while. I don't remember, Tommy, it was a January 26th, 1943. It was the first mission to Germany.
Yeah, I'd have to look, but it was pretty early.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
you know, to your comments on the 100 bomb group too. I mean, you got to pick a group to go somewhere with this storyline, and that's one that, as you're saying right now, I mean, we can find such an early focal point in the war, and so much heavy combat, so many major missions that the Eighth Air Force undertook. Obviously, had a huge effect on the 100 bomb group. And I do want to throw in before we start getting into other comments about the series itself. I do worry or am slightly frustrated with all the hype. And I don't mean the hype of the show, but the hype of comparing it to Band of Brothers and the Pacific. And I felt the same way when the Pacific came out. It's totally different theaters, totally different service branches, frankly, even though it's still under the Army in World War II. You know, if we refer to the Air Force, we realize that obviously that's its own branch today. But um, to me, it's not fair to the actors. It's not fair to the 100 bomb group. You know, this is a whole different thing from Dick Winters saving World War II single-handedly, as it seems to be portrayed these days. You know, it's not. In all, you know, all due respect to Easy Company and its story, um, that came along at a perfect time too. It came along right at 9/11. It was something HBO put out that had never been done, a mini series, you know, of World War II, with a ton of actors, also a lot of British and Irish. Great series. I love it. It's still something I watch almost yearly. You know, identify it heavily with having a grandfather who fought, you know, in the infantry in Europe in World War II. The Pacific, great series as well. Not fair to compare it to Band of Brothers. And it's a whole different thing. It's all about the Marine Corps primarily. I get it. You know, specific Marine units and other things too. There's CGI in that as well. And obviously with this series, it's a whole different concept. There's nothing on the ground. Everything's air related. They're going to have to use a lot of CGI. And I don't mean this to sound like a rant. It's just it's interesting. And I've already seen, with trying not to see too much before I watch the series, but I was already seeing people pop stuff up on Facebook just saying, you know, this is nothing like Band of Brothers, or this is nothing like the
not supposed
Pacific.
to be.
Well, it's not supposed to be. No, it's a
Exactly.
whole different type of war. I think, as people will see, and those who don't understand that will probably see more of that as I imagine these episodes start to unfold. But I just want to throw that
Yeah.
out there before we get, you know, any further into the story there.
No, I think
Tommy,
that's accurate. But go ahead, Bill.
well, what I was going to say is I want to spin off that because I've been waiting for decades for the canonical submarine World War II Pacific submarine movie to come out. And, you know, at first when I heard about this, I was thinking, oh, come on. This series could not have been made until now. There's, you know, we made, I think at the beginning, the first mission. By the way, before we start, we should jump in here and say, spoiler alert, these episodes are 100% going to be spoiler alert. If you haven't watched the show yet, you might want to watch the show before you listen to the podcast, because we're going to reveal all kinds of things about each episode in our episodes. So spoiler alert, you know, they're at the beginning, the first mission these guys fly, the wing had 72 airplanes flying. We built, because there are only something like 200 B-17s in existence when we entered the war. We built 12,000 B-17s during the war. And some of these missions had 1,000, 1,200 airplanes flying in the wing in a single mission. You could not do that show without CGI, computer generated in imaging, right? And so this could not have been made before now. So is it CGI? Yeah, but it's really good CGI. And a submarine movie, it's an interior shot, it's claustrophobic, you know, 1945, except for the silly surface ships being torpedoed. The 1945 submarine movies were pretty realistic from that standpoint, the interior shots and all that. This could not have been made until now, so I'm glad they did it.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
me too.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And you know, for those who are going to bag on the series because there isn't, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have a very thin connection to this. I mean, I know Tommy and I, you know, we knew a lot of guys in the 100th. Full transparency, didn't know Clevin, didn't know Egan, didn't know Harry Crosby. Those guys passed on before we had a chance to meet them, or Rosie Rosenthal, know his son Dan. But
Hey, Dan.
you know, yeah, hey Dan. But you know, it's Band of Brothers focused on a company, Easy Company, 506, 101st Airborne. And to be perfectly honest with you, as I was telling one of our historians here at the museum this morning, it really only focused on the mortar platoon. That was it, because you really hardly ever hear about the riflemen because most of those guys were killed or wounded. So you focus on the mortar platoon. So that's why you got to know those guys so well, because they stuck around for a lot of the war. Pacific focused on 2 Marine regiments, 1st and the 5th. And within there, yeah, there's 2 companies in there, but there's a lot of guys rotating in and out of there. Bill, as you well know, as we've gone through the series of the war in our normal show, there's thousands of guys literally rotating in and out of that division. If you think you haven't seen a lot of character development now, just wait, because the 100th Bomb Group, you're talking about an entire bomb group. Yes, there are going to be the main characters. You're going to see those guys repeatedly. But I mean, they're introducing the ground crews and these guys like Ken Lemons and people like that who are, need to be introduced. But there's going to be hundreds of people, so you're not going to have, I don't think, the emotional connection to these guys that you did. But it is what it is. They're trying to tell a story, the overarching story of the 8th Air Force over Europe in World War II, and they're using the Bloody 100th as that voice, and that's what you need to consider as you watch this.
And if I can interject to that comment as well, I mean, as we see, and it's referenced in other war films and things over the years too, but you don't have that emotional connection either with a lot of these guys as they keep going on to missions and they meet a guy and then 2 missions later he's gone. I remember talking to a lot of these guys saying after their initial group went over, it got harder and harder to really make new friends or become really close until many years later at reunions, because you never knew who was going to be there or not be there or end up in PW camp or whatever. But, so I don't think you're going to see that emotional connection you have with something like Easy Company, where these guys trained together, went overseas together, fought together, foxhole to foxhole every day. It's a different war. These guys flew and they came home or they didn't.
Those guys were picked off one by one, right? So the platoon would have replacements. These guys, like submarines, you lost the entire crew. You lost the plane, everybody dies. If you're lucky enough to bail out. In a submarine, everybody dies. So you're losing large groups in a single, beat. And so it's very, very different. One more thing I want to say, on the point of, we made 12,000 of these airplanes during the war. A lot of them went overseas, but to other countries. And we would fly more missions, more airplanes in a single mission in World War II than the United States has airplanes in total today. Get your mind around that. Yeah. It's pretty amazing when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
Talking about combat aircraft. Go ahead.
The explosion in numbers of the 8th Air Force is something that we're going to talk about as the series progresses, particularly after October 1943, because there's a series of missions during what's called Black Week in October 1943 where the 8th just gets it handed to them. I mean, bad. And we'll get into that as we move along. But the explosion in numbers after October 14th, which, if you know what that is, that's Second Schweinfurt, from then until January 1944 is inconceivable. It really is. And we'll get to that when we get to that point. But just to kind of set up the 8th Air Force, as I said, they got over to England in 42, and the 8th Air Force was formed in Savannah, Georgia. And, and they had, 8 planes, I mean, it was ridiculous how small it was when it was first formed. Then they move over to Europe in 42 and they start bombing France first in 1942, mostly targets in France, until their first raid into Germany in 1943, January. I don't remember the exact date. Again, by the way, we're doing this off the cuff. No notes, or if the notes are, they're literally like people's names. So forgive us. But it's pretty amazing the way things developed. And there's something too that they make a point of in the first episode. I think it's the first episode where they're talking about daylight bombing versus nighttime area bombing.
That's the second episode, Seth.
Yeah, they get a little more into the second episode.
Yeah.
Okay,
then
we'll
address
say
it in
that
the
for next
first.
week.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's get to the first episode. So you meet a lot of the characters here. You meet Gail Clevin, you meet John Egan, you meet Harry Crosby. There's several characters that you meet. And I just took notes on those first 3 people that I just spit out, because they're going to factor heavily into everything that the 100th Bomb Group does, everything that you see in this series for the remainder of this series. These were real people We'll start with Clevin, Gil Buck Clevin. He, like they said in the series, he got his nickname from Bucky Egan, from Johnny Egan, who said it reminded him of someone. Gail Clevin always went by Gail until he met John Egan. And then after that, he forever remained Buck Clevin. I personally, from what I read of the man, I don't really think he cared what anybody called him, as long as, they were cool. He was a pretty laid back guy, from what I understand about the man himself. He did have, as they're kind of building it up into the series, apparently Clevin had a command presence to him. Like, he was just one of these people who, when he walked into a room, he didn't have to say anything. People just went, and they looked right at him and were like, "What are you going to do, boss? Because I'm going to follow you wherever you go." And
And by the way, Seth, both these guys are majors, right? And both of them joined up before the war began. And Clevin was squadron CO, I think. And then at the beginning, Bucky, Egan, was the 100th air exec, which he wasn't real happy about, right?
Correct.
So they're both leaders.
Yeah. But Clevin specific, Egan too. Egan was very devil may care. He was portrayed, so far portrayed in the series, in that he was very, no pun intended, fly by the seat of your pants kind of a guy. He was, very garish in his dress. That you see him wearing this white flying coat. People are going to go, "That's a model." I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not Army Air Force issue 1943 era white flying coat that he was famous for wearing. He wore that thing all the time. He was very loud, very outspoken, he was a partier. He was a heavy drinker.
Very attention seeking.
Yes. Yes.
Very like to be in the spotlight a little bit, and whether he was drinking or singing after drinking or during drinking, very much like to be the life of the party, even if there was no party at the moment.
Yeah. Then there's a scene where he has broken a narwhal tusk in a bar in Greenland. and of course those things are fairly rare, and I guess that was a true story, right?
I got to be honest with you, I don't know. There's several little intricate parts of this story that I cannot confirm or deny. I do not know. It seems like it would certainly have been likely of the man to have done that. I don't know if he did. I have no earthly idea. Tommy, do you? I mean, that's.
I don't remember it, man. Like I said, I didn't do a deep dive research for this, because I thought, this would be hours long if we do. But my impression is it's totally possible, plausible, if not something else. Just the same with, as you see later on, dart throwing, other things going on. But definitely a life of the party goes wherever he goes kind of guy.
Yeah, no. So yeah, you're right. I mean, what is it plausible that it happened? Yeah. Did it happen? God knows. I have no earthly idea if it happened or not. The constant bickering back and forth with the RAF. I don't know if it was that quite constant. I mean, it certainly happened in some respects, but to that degree, I couldn't tell you.
And that conversation, I think that was to introduce the different philosophies between the way we bombed and the way they bombed. That happened in episode 2. So we'll talk about that, next, whenever we do that one. But the truth, and so there's the Norden bomb site. I guess I could talk about that as well. That sucker was an engineering marvel. It was actually designed and built in a little factory outside Indianapolis. The reason I know that is when I worked at Raytheon, that factory was part of our portfolio, and it had like a 15-foot thick concrete foundation in the building to provide stability from micro earthquakes for the calibration of those Norden bomb sites. That's something we had. And in the show, they say it was secret, second only to the atomic bomb, to the Manhattan Project. And I suspect that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but it was really, really secret. We didn't even share it with the Brits. So the Norden bomb site did allow us to do daylight precision bombing, because you had to see the target in order to use it. And the Brits, in contrast, didn't have the Norden bomb site. They did nighttime carpet bombing is what we would call today, which resulted in far more civilian casualties than our daylight precision bombing did. So that becomes a whole plot point. But I think it's in episode 2.
It is, but we can get into that now just briefly because, again, it sets up the whole 8th Air Force thing is the Norden bomb. And you're right. And again, I agree with you. I think that was a little bit overstretched. It was second only to the bomb in terms of secrecy. However, the Norden bomb site was uber top secret. It was uber top secret, so much so that earlier in the war, and even when they were in Europe, and Tommy, I know you know these stories, that the bombardiers had to move with the bomb site wherever it went. So in other words, if the bombardiers went and got the site out of like a sealed concrete bunker on the base and walked with it to the airplane armed with a 1911 strapped to their hip, whether they were in the United States or England or Foggia or wherever. And when that bomb site came out of that airplane, the bombardiers took it out, put it in like a big OD green bag, and hoofed that thing back into the concrete bunker. And only then and only then were they allowed to take off that sidearm. Did they stick to that routine? I don't know. But that's what they were told they had to do. And I remember
that was protocol for the time for sure.
Yeah. I remember Joe Armanini, a bombardier from the 100th Bomb Group, as a matter of fact, saying that very thing, that it used to piss him off because he's like, I just got to go pee. But he had to go and bring the damn bomb site back to the hut after each single mission that they went on. And it was a real pain. But yeah, that thing did allow the daylight area bombing or daylight strategic bombing, area bombing with the Brits, that the 8th Air Force and later the 15th Air Force did do. Now, there are several misconceptions about the Norden. The Norden was, supposedly could put a bomb in the pickle barrel from, 25,000 feet, and malarkey, all you got to do.
It sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds plausible, but it's completely inaccurate because all you got to do is look at footage of these guys dropping bombs. And I mean, they are all over the map. So these things, were they more accurate than some bomb sites? For sure. Were they, that accurate? Hell no. Absolutely not. But it was
you guys,
the way we did it.
Once it sort of attaches itself to the aircraft, what did you guys think of the first sequence you see in the first episode, to my memory? I mean, I know we see, I guess it's not the first reference, but you start seeing the first series there of the B-17s in flight. And then you see them going to Greenland and other stuff too later on. I mean, what were y'all's impressions of the aircraft, of the CGI, of the acting, of the way that it was all built and put together for the series?
I thought it looked outstanding. I'll be honest with you. I agree with Bill. What Bill said earlier, the CGI for this series is unbelievable. And to Bill's point, unless you want to crank out, a couple of $1 billion worth of airplanes to make them all fly in the air at one time, this is the only way that it can get done, and it's done very, very well. The airplanes are marked, when they're going into Greenland, they're marked appropriately. For dorks like us who look at all the little intricate details, when those airplanes are going in there, they're marked appropriately. They don't have the big square D on the tail yet because that wasn't a thing. They're all green, which is the correct color for 1943 when they're flying over there. They're not silver yet. That comes later. Particularly the shot when they're coming into Greenland and they're focusing on Gil Clevin, and he's bringing that thing in that crosswind. That's real. I mean, that area was notoriously fickle, and it was it's not like they had any other place to go. That was the only place they could go in the ferry route across the ocean to England. But the way that Clevin character Elvis puts the airplane down is accurate apparently to the way Clevin flew. Like, he was
I've done
an incredible pilot.
Back in my flying days, I did a couple of crosswind landings, nothing like that, but they do it precisely right in the show. It's just, you crab into the wind, right, to keep flying. Basically, your glide path has to be aligned with the runway, and then you kick the rudder to straighten out so you don't go off into the grass right at the last moment. It was all done perfectly well. The other thing I liked about that whole series, and this actually I think is before the first bombing mission, is the way they jump from cockpit to cockpit, doing the pre-takeoff checklist and starting the engines and all that. Just really, really cool. And you can tell these actors had to study the checklists, and they're getting the exact right switches in the exact right order. So somebody did their homework with all that. That's really cool. And one more point, is that with respect to the CGI, you know, somebody's going to say, but there's a couple of real B-17s still flying in the world. And I shouldn't say this, because if John Marshall hears me say this, he's going to get mad at me. But yeah, I rode on one out of Leesburg, Virginia, at an air show one year, and actually photographed it. And the problem with the flying 80-year-old airplanes is there ain't many of them, number one. And number two, occasionally they crash, which makes them even fewer of them. So real historians like you guys, not me, you don't like when they fly these the very few of these airplanes that exist in the world. And so I think that the Spielberg, Hanks guys had the right attitude with respect to, we're not going to fly real airplanes and risk losing the very few of them that still exist in the world today.
And not to mention, I think, you know, with filming this in England, they only have one flying B-17 or potentially flyable B-17 in England right now.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
if you put the people in there who probably can fly that, they probably don't look very much like the age or handsome factor, if you will, no disrespect to these pilots, of these actors. So it'll be very noticeable. They'd have to do CGI even to make the shots, you know, exterior look like a bunch of young 20-something-year-olds. And you know, I think it was smart. You know, I love seeing these aircraft fly, but you're right, it's
Sure.
getting more and more difficult. The government's making it more difficult in the United States to even do that anymore. You know, there was one, I got to bring it up. One thing, and Seth and I both have also had the chance to fly in some of these birds. One thing that did drive me crazy on the CGI, and you can definitely see it throughout the first and second episode, are the wings, or more importantly, the horizontal stabilizers flopping like this.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if they're on the ground or in flight, those guys, you know, are sitting there. You see the shot of them speaking, and it's so distracting to me because it looks like a rubber band back there. And I thought, if that's they're
That
not
plane's
taking
gonna be doing
off,
this.
yeah, it's not going to fly home if those are out, you know, and every single one of them. It's just, I get it. It's computers. There's some probably kinks in the technology to still work out, but it is a little bit distracting to see that. And
Yeah.
you know, there's some colorization things here and there that maybe they could have done a little bit differently, where you could see it's a little bluer than the shot of the runway as things are running off, whatever. But I agree with you. I think CGI, they didn't have a whole lot of choices otherwise. And I'm sure everybody would say, well, you know, the Memphis Belle, they didn't have the CGI. Well, they also didn't show the outside of the plane very much. And when they did, it was a model mostly. But I thought
And it
it
wasn't
was good.
hundreds of them. Yeah.
Well,
Right.
right. So I think it's great to have the CGI. I just wish they'd fix that one little distraction thing. And if you didn't notice it before, you'll see it from here on.
You'll
You know,
see it
anytime
now.
every time you see someone with a window nearby, look for a wing just going like this. It's it's
The
a
wings
little
do
nuts.
flex some, but not as
Yeah,
much as they're showing.
Not to that
not like a
degree.
Bugs
Yeah.
Bunny cartoon.
Yeah.
So let's talk about another character. And I say character because they're a character, but they were real people. And when Bill, you were talking about memoirs, I held this one up. You know, it's A Wing and a Prayer, written
Mhm.
by Harry Crosby, and that's one of the main characters in this series is Harry Crosby. You meet Cros in the beginning, or I'd say not the beginning, probably about a third of the way through the first episode. And he's a navigator. He's one of the navigators in the 100th. He's one of the original members of the 100th. He joined the group, you know, when they were still, you know, before Wendover, Utah. You know, I mean, he is a charter member of the Bloody Hunt, was a charter member of the Bloody 100th. Tommy, you had some issues with the way that Crosby was portrayed so
Yeah,
far.
admittedly, Seth and I have not talked much about this, even though we're working, you know, 50 feet from each other or something. We've been trying to save it to put it on air. But the one thing I did slip and tell him today was that it bothered me a little bit in how they portrayed Crosby, because I didn't know the man. I see him as a professional. I remember that these folks are well trained long before they even got to England. And they make him, as I put it to Seth earlier, they make him look like Don Knotts. They make him look like Barney Fife, who's one bullet short in his pocket, short of navigating a mission or something. Uh, I don't I don't know. Again, he may have been kind of a goofball. I didn't get to know the man, unfortunately, but I feel like they've gone a little over the top, making it look like he just sort of hopped onto a plane, rode over to England, and all of a sudden found himself in the 8th Air Force. And it just doesn't feel like what I feel after reading his book, especially many years ago. Even uh, I don't see him as sort of that screwball kind of Barney Fife,
He
Don
wasn't.
Knotts type of character, and I'm hoping that
No.
portrayal continues in a better form as he gets more missions under his wing or whatever else. That they don't continue that sort of caricature of him throughout the series. But
Yeah.
Well,
those are my
but
thoughts.
one thing is every time you see him, he's vomiting.
Yeah,
He suffered from air sickness, and
Which is
that
true.
gets old really.
yeah, yeah.
It is
Yeah.
true, yeah, but it gets old really fast. And the second thing is, the pilot to navigator. What course should we turn to? And he looks at the chart and he gives him a course. Dude, it requires a lot of calculation and a lot of plotting, and it's pre-planned. It's not like let me figure it out. It's now you're taking fixes as you're flying, so there are adjustments, but this isn't like charts flying all over the place and it's way
Like a
too
Three
haphazard.
Stooges movie. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's
I agree with you on this,
little
Tommy. It's
slapstick, slap happy kind of comedic portrayal of him, and maybe they did that to lighten the series. I really don't know because it is and will be very dark at times. But I just feel like it maybe is a little bit of a disservice to him, in my opinion, since he's a real guy.
well,
Yeah.
the other thing you should know about Crosby is he is the kind of the titular narrator from this whole
Yes.
thing. So
Yeah.
when you hear somebody talking, narrating, it's Crosby, and it took me a while to figure that out. Actually, who's
Yeah.
who's talking, who's narrating?
So Harry Crosby was, as I said, he was a charter member of the group, and Harry Crosby was. And first of all, you got to be a smart dude to be a navigator. I mean, you can't just be some yokel. You got to be a smart cat to be a navigator. And Crosby was incredibly cerebral. Like he was borderline genius. I mean, the guy was on the
Even though
ball. I mean,
they accidentally fly to France on their first.
so that was a real deal. That actually happened, and I'm
happened.
glad you brought that up
Yeah.
because I was going to bring that up too. And that, yeah. So no lie, for as good as Crosby was and becomes in his professional role, yeah, he kind of screwed up. As they're getting over there, they do fly. They don't fly into France. And I refer to the book right before I hit record. They did not fly into France. They flew close to France. They did not, by any account, including his own, did they take anti-aircraft fire over France because they didn't get that close, number one. Number two, and I do have a problem with that, is that, as they're nearing the coast, it's like, boom, the sky's filled with flak. No, that's not how that worked. It didn't work like that.
Mhm.
It was a slow buildup, and then don't get me wrong. I mean, the sky was filled with flak, but it wasn't just like poof and it was here. It didn't. That's not how flak works. But there was no account in Crosby's own hand of them taking any aircraft fire, flying over France or anything like that. Did they get lost? Yes, he did. Did he wind up bringing the airplane home and having to belly down? Yes, he did. Did he have air sickness? Yes, he did. Did John Brady, who was his pilot at that time, climb all over him about, A, getting lost, and B, quit barfing and figure out where the hell we're going? Yes, he did. So that
Get off
is
my crew.
accurate. Yeah, yeah. Well, Brady, again, I don't ever remember Brady saying that. I don't ever remember reading Brady saying that. I could see it happening, but again, a lot of this is supposition because none of us had voice recorders then to record these conversations. But some of that is accurate, some of that is not accurate. I agree with you 100%, Tommy. He does look like Barney Fife trying to go get Otis, and that in the beginning, and like you said, Bill, charts flying all over the place, and we'll get to episode 2 here in our next episode we do with this. That there's some inaccuracies there, but as this first episode is set up, and that's another thing before we wrap this quick one up. We're up at 45 minutes now ish. The first, I knew we'd do this. The first mission that they fly is indeed well, I mean, technically the 100th flies a couple of diversionary targets. They on June 22nd, I'm looking at it right now, June 22nd, 1943. They fly a diversion route to the North Sea. Nothing really happens. They don't get any credit for any of this stuff. On June 25th, 1943, they put up, it's their first technical mission and they lose 3 aircraft. They show that in the series, that they lose 3 aircraft, that the aircraft, that the mission is somewhat scrubbed, and to a point it is.
And that was a mission against Bremen U-boat pens, right?
Correct. Yeah.
In fact, their first 2 missions are against U-boats. I found that
Yeah.
interesting, but not surprising.
So, and the thing too is, and that's another thing that needs to be addressed historically, is that the first several missions for the 8th Air Force, in 1942, all the way really into 1943, until about the summer, which is when the 100th gets there, are generally U-boats in and along the coast of France, and U-boat pens rather, in and along the coast of France. And the reason for that being is because the U-boats were kicking our ass in 1942 and 1943. And the 8th Air Force, and particularly the British, felt that if we could knock some of these U-boats out before they ever got into the Atlantic, it would help us, which, I mean, is a very, very logical thought. However, it's often portrayed that the raids over the U-boat pens in France in 1942 and 43 were these cakewalks. They called them milk runs, because they were not, because they were so heavily infested with anti-aircraft fire, because the Germans also knew, it's like, yeah, don't be messing with our U-boats. They were not the milk runs that they are often portrayed to be. And a lot of the 100th's first missions were of that variety. I mean, as I said, the Bremen subyards on June 25th. And then after that, they're flying 8 more missions, 8 more missions into France, to Le Mans, Saint-Nazaire, Le Mans, La Pallice, Le Bourget, Le Bourget, Le Bourget, before they hit Germany again in Hamburg. And then they actually, they're going after engines, and they're recalled on that mission anyway. They don't even wind up getting out there. But it's a significant, target hitting these U-boat pens. It wasn't a walk in the park by any means, and Bremen certainly wasn't.
I like to, before the mission, the idea that they showed the average morning, these guys are awakened by some of the ground crew or whoever, and then sent off to a hearty breakfast.
The Last Supper.
That was, I heard so many guys talk about that, and I've heard sailors, and Marines talk about that idea too, that, we knew we were getting close to an invasion when the food started getting good. I mean, you see that even though it's powdered eggs, everything else, I like that they're showing all these guys that, that whole idea of this massive meal, they're going to be in the air for hours. And then, they also, you start seeing some of the superstition in there with a guy who, spills the salt and ends up throwing the whole salt shaker over his,
which was
his shoulder. That was comedic, but I like that they portrayed that and didn't just go straight into a mission.
And they're gearing up. I mean, the detail, the uniforms are exactly right. Yeah, remember, folks, that it was 40 below zero at altitude. They've got open windows, right? And they have those Blue Bunny heated electric coveralls that they show hanging on the racks in the in the ready room, not the ready rooms, but the gear rooms. Those really existed. You plugged them in. They electric heaters in the coveralls that went underneath your jacket. They called them Blue Bunny suits. Those, little details like, look, if you've got to go to the bathroom, I don't think they use piddle packs, because if you urinated into the piddle pack, the urine would freeze to your leg. These are things that people don't think about, now, but it's all true.
Yeah. And, getting back real quick to that first mission as it's portrayed in the series, it's portrayed that the 100th goes out and Colonel Hugland, who was their CEO at the time, scrubs the mission and calls them back, and they jettison their bombs and all this other stuff. And that's not 100% accurate either. Which, when I first, and again, full transparency, I haven't read a lot about the 8th Air Force in a long time. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me. That doesn't seem like the right story. And it actually isn't, because the 100th did go out on that mission. They were called back to turn around. They were part of the formation of the 8th Air Force going out there to bomb Bremen. That mission was indeed scrubbed, but it wasn't Colonel Hugland that said, no, we're not dropping a target, or we're not dropping bombs because we can't see the target.
Because we can't see the target.
Right.
Yeah.
That didn't happen because the weather was bad over Bremen, and formation was called back, the 100th did not get the call. Whether there was, something in the ionosphere, to quote Kelly's Heroes, get the ionosphere the hell off of here, but they did not pick up the message, and they did go into France and they did lose 3 aircraft, but it wasn't Colonel Hugman who said, we can't see the target, we're turning around, we're coming back. That's not how it happened. There was a certain amount of confusion with the entire 8th Air Force that day, which is what caused that mission to be scrubbed that into bad weather. It wasn't the hunters saying, we're not going to hit the target, so we're going to bring our bombs back and all this other stuff. That was an amalgamation of several things that I think that they were just trying to add drama to the series to put it into historical perspective. That is not exactly how it was actually on that day. So,
Hey, let me ask you a
I
question, because
digress.
they refer to the wing commander as Colonel LeMay, Curtis LeMay. So in 43, he was a colonel, because when he gets to the Pacific, for the Japan bombing, he's a 4-star. Like, so is that right? He was promoted from 06 to 010 in 2 years.
So yeah, he gets to get back a little bit. Colonel LeMay, and he was Colonel LeMay, is exactly right. He was actually CO of the 305th Bombardment Group. He was a CO of the 305th before all this goes on, and he didn't take on a major leadership role within the 8th Air Force for a while. And because it was, help me out, Tommy, it's Ira Eaker?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, it was Eaker, and then he was eventually replaced by Jimmy Doolittle. And, so LeMay gets transported back to the United States, and that's where I don't remember, was he a 4-star at the end of the war? LeMay?
I think so.
Damn.
Yeah.
I don't recall. Regardless, he did see some 8th Air Force time. He saw quite a bit of it actually, and then obviously takes his role into the Pacific as General LeMay.
Yeah, he was chief of staff of the U.S. Air Force in the 1960s. So
yeah, maybe he wasn't a 4-star then by 45, but yeah, when we dropped the atomic bombs, I could swear that he was a 4-star, but could be wrong.
Regardless. But yeah, he did see some 8th Air Force time though, to answer your question. Well, I don't want to ramble too much more, but overall, I think we should all give our assessment of each episode as we go along, and I'll start. So far, the first episode of Masters of the Air, I have to say, even with the couple of little flubs that they had, specifically with the 100th first mission, that I was like, even with that, take that out of the equation, that, if you do a little reading, you can figure it out on your own. I think they did it very well. The way they, the gear is exceptional. The guys look the part, they got the gear, the uniforms are right. The equipment is right. The airplanes look fantastic. The CGI is incredible. It looks really good. It sounds really good. The radio comms, I think, and we'll get that to episode 2. The radio comms are a bit much, but regardless of this, I think it's well done so far. Episode 1, I enjoyed it very much. I immediately felt a tug at my heart, when they took off on their first mission, because again, not to beat a dead horse, but I knew these guys. So it hit me pretty hard. I'm not gonna lie. Watching them take off for their first mission, I'm like, oh God, eventually what's going to happen to a lot of these people. And it did kind of tug at the old heartstrings, but I liked it so far. Episode 1, I thought was very, very good. What about you, Tommy? What'd you think?
I liked it. I was sort of with all the hype and the, like I said, the ties to Band of Brothers and all the conversations. This is like the, third part of the Band of Brothers series, or whatever. I think it lived up to the hype. I'm excited to see the rest of it. I've got, obviously, like we talked about, or Seth just talked about. I mean, I got ties to a lot of the bombers, crew members, and other folks, and this group plus other groups. Even have family ties to the 390th, which maybe we'll get into in a future episode later in the war. But for me, same thing. Seeing this mission take off and seeing the life and the times of these airmen and these air crews and the camaraderie they've built together to go into these dangerous places, realizing they've got no foxhole to jump into. I mean, they're just a target in the sky that can go down really quickly. Seeing the dangers, not just from the enemy, but, with the portrayals of flak, but we didn't even really get into fighters yet, but, the intensity of fighters screaming by them at almost double the speed of what the 17 is flying, and the idea they can get into clouds at any time and almost crash into each other anyway. felt like there was a lot of moments in there, kind of put a lump in your throat or kind of make you, sit on the edge of your seat. I'm looking forward to the rest of this series, and I feel like it's off to a good start. Yeah, you're going to find some technical stuff. I'm sure someone's going to comment on here on your YouTube page or send you guys an email saying, there were four too many or four too few rivets in some scene of some some portion of the aircraft. There's
Guaranteed.
always going to be
Bilge
that
pumps.
stuff. Yeah, I
Bilge
mean, there's
pumps.
always going to be something, somebody comment on not enough ammunition cans or some mess. I don't know. There'll be something in there, but overall, one big thing I really love compared to a lot of other movies with aviation. I love the fact that when they're low altitude, their masks are off. You can see the actors' faces, but they're not afraid to put the mask on and spend entire minutes and jump from aircraft to aircraft where all you see are their eyes, the way it would have actually been. It drives me
Right.
crazy looking at movies like Red Tails, whatever else, where they're flying all the time with their mask here. And, you kind of see them half speak into it, and that's about it. But the actors never really want to cover their faces. I like the fact that these guys, even Elvis, was not afraid to cover over their face and portray it as best as they can to the original guys. I thought they did a great job.
Agreed.
Well, the reference there to even Elvis is the actor that plays Buck played Elvis in the
Yeah.
the movie that came out a couple of years ago, right? Yeah, and I was skeptical that he could do this, but he's doing it. Yeah. So before I jump in and answer the question, Seth, I just did some real-time research. Is always dangerous, but it looks like LeMay was a 2-star in 45. So
There you go.
silly me for getting that wrong. So I'm inclined to say any exposure our World War II heroes gets, I'm all for that. But we've all seen World War II movies or shows where we were dumber after we watched it than we were before we started, right? So they can screw it up. We've seen them screw it up. So I'm not going to say anything that exposes our World War II heroes. What I will say is this one is exactly what I hoped it would be. It's keeping the technical details right enough to keep geeks from the bilge pump comment, by the way, is inside joke for us because people, I said somebody's going to come and criticize me on some minor detail on Vallejo class bilge pumps. So that's been a recurring theme throughout our series on World War II. And somebody's going to, like you said, Tommy, somebody can count the number of rivets or the way that the ailerons are moving. So
how high the zipper is on someone's jacket.
Exactly. You're going to find
They were
things
4
to
buttons,
criticize.
not 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But my goodness, 95% right in my estimation, just looking at it. 90, and yeah, there are wonderful B-17 movies. Memphis Belle is one of those. But again, just like I said about the submarine movies, they've got to focus on the interior because you can't do 1,000 plane formations. Didn't have the technology. We do now. So I'm really, really liking it from that standpoint. And yes, when you get to see what our World War II heroes went through and then compare it to anything modern, it's calibrating for you. And so, yes, I'm very grateful that they've made this series, and I'm looking forward to all the future episodes.
Agree 100% with both of you guys. It's visually stunning and it's emotionally stirring so far, episode 1. So definitely check it out. And with that, we want to thank you very much for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast, wherever you receive your podcast. Give us a rating and review. We certainly do appreciate it. Also, if you want to see the video version of this, if you're not already looking at it, check out our YouTube channel called, you know where it is. If you have a question or a comment, I'm sure you will, please send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. So once again, my name is Seth Perrin, and I want to thank you very much. Tommy, thank you for joining us, and we were going to see you for the next 9 or 10 episodes that we do with this bad boy. Thank you for being here, my friend, and we will see you next week. Hope you enjoyed hanging out with us this morning. Bill, take us home.
Well, see you tomorrow if you're going to watch the regular episode, and see you next week if you're not.